My name is Lisa Garcia, and I'm a 32-year-old single mother to the most amazing kids, 8-year-old Sophia and 6-year-old Carlos. After my divorce left me financially devastated, my parents offered us a lifeline by letting us move into their Denver home. I was so grateful for their help while I rebuilt our lives as an elementary school teacher. Then, my older brother Michael married Caitlin, a wealthy interior designer with very specific ideas about proper living standards. Suddenly, my children, who had been the center of my parents' world for years, became obstacles to Caitlin's vision of the perfect family home. What started as small changes, moving my kids' toys, criticizing their noise levels, escalated into something I never saw coming. The day I found my children's belongings moved to the unheated attic was the day I realized my own family had betrayed us completely. If you're watching from a blended family situation, drop a comment below and subscribe for more real stories about protecting your children when family loyalty gets complicated. My life fell apart on a Tuesday morning in March when my husband Roberto told me he was leaving. After 8 years of marriage, he had fallen in love with a coworker and wanted a divorce. I sat in our kitchen in Aurora, staring at the breakfast dishes while he packed his suitcase upstairs, trying to process how quickly my world had crumbled. Roberto worked in construction management, making decent money, while I had been teaching third grade at Montview Elementary for 6 years. We had always planned for me to work part-time once we had kids, but when Sophia and Carlos came along just 18 months apart, childcare costs made it more practical for me to stay home with them for their early years. I had only returned to full-time teaching the previous fall, and my salary of $42,000 barely covered our household expenses, even with Roberto's income. The divorce was swift and brutal. Roberto moved in with his girlfriend immediately, and his lawyer was aggressive about protecting his assets. I ended up with our modest 3-bedroom house, but also the mortgage payments I couldn't afford on my teacher salary. Child support would help, but Roberto's irregular construction income meant those payments were often late or incomplete. Within 3 months, I was behind on utilities and facing foreclosure. Sophia and Carlos, bless their hearts, tried to be brave through the upheaval. Sophia, my 8-year-old, had always been my little helper, responsible, thoughtful, and sensitive to everyone's emotions. She started making her own lunch and helping Carlos get dressed in the morning without being asked. Carlos, my 6-year-old tornado of energy, became unusually quiet, spending hours building elaborate Lego structures in his room while I made desperate phone calls to creditors. By June, I had no choice but to sell the house. Even with the small profit after paying off the mortgage, I didn't have enough for first month rent, last month rent, and security deposit on any apartment large enough for the 3 of us in Denver's increasingly expensive rental market. My teaching salary, solid as it was, looked inadequate next to the housing costs that had skyrocketed during the pandemic. That's when my parents, Elena and Carlos Sr., yes, I named my son after my father, stepped in with their offer. They lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom ranch house in Lakewood that they had bought in 1995 when Dad retired from his job as a mechanic at United Airlines. Mom had worked as a secretary at Denver Public Schools for 30 years before retiring, so she understood the challenges teachers faced with housing costs. "Mija, you and the children come stay with us," Mom said during one of our tearful phone conversations. "It's just temporary, until you get back on your feet. The kids can have the spare bedrooms, and you can save money for your own place." I was hesitant at first. Living with my parents as an adult felt like admitting failure, even though I knew logically that wasn't true. My relationship with them had always been loving, but complicated. As the younger child, I had often felt overshadowed by my older brother Michael, who seemed to excel at everything effortlessly, while I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. Michael, now 35,
had always been the golden child. He was charming, confident, and successful in ways that our traditional Mexican-American parents understood and celebrated. He had parlayed a business degree from University of Colorado into a lucrative career in pharmaceutical sales, driving luxury cars and living in a beautiful house in Cherry Creek. At family gatherings, conversations inevitably centered around Michael's latest achievements: his sales bonuses, his expensive vacations, his perfect life. Meanwhile, my choice to become a teacher was viewed as noble but impractical. Teaching is important, Dad would say, but it doesn't pay the bills. The fact that I was now divorced and struggling financially only seems to confirm their belief that I had made poor life choices. Despite my reservations, I accepted their offer. In late July, Sophia, Carlos, and I moved into my childhood home with 2 suitcases each and a U-Haul truck containing the furniture and belongings I couldn't bear to sell. The kids were excited about having their own rooms and living with their beloved abuelos, while I felt a mixture of gratitude and shame that I couldn't provide stability on my own. Initially, the arrangement worked well. My parents had converted Dad's old workshop into a playroom for the kids and set up a small desk area where I could grade papers in the evenings. Mom helped with pickups from summer camp when I had to attend teacher training sessions, and Dad taught Carlos how to ride a bike without training wheels in their spacious backyard. Sophia thrived in the attention from her grandparents. She would help Mom in the kitchen, learning family recipes and practicing her Spanish while they cooked together. Carlos attached himself to Dad, following him around the garage and asking endless questions about how things worked. For the first time since the divorce, I saw my children truly happy and secure. I contributed $800 monthly towards household expenses, all I could manage on my salary, after paying my car loan, insurance, and other debts from the divorce. I also took over most of the grocery shopping and cooking, partly to help out and partly because it gave me some control over our situation. The plan was to save as much as possible during the school year and find our own apartment by the following summer. My parents were genuinely helpful and loving grandparents, but the family dynamics I remembered from childhood quickly reasserted themselves. Michael remained the center of attention whenever he visited, which was usually for Sunday dinners when he would regale us with stories about his success while I served food and cleaned up afterwards. Michael had been single for most of his adult life, dating casually but never settling down. Our parents had given up hope of grandchildren from him, which made Sophia and Carlos especially precious to them. "At least one of my children gave me grandchildren," Mom would say with a pointed look at Michael, though she said it fondly. Everything changed in September when Michael announced he was getting married. Her name was Caitlin Walsh, and she was everything our parents had dreamed of in a daughter-in-law. Beautiful, educated, and from a wealthy family. She worked as an interior designer for high-end clients, drove a BMW, and wore clothes that cost more than I made in a month. I first met Caitlin at a family dinner 3 weeks before their October wedding. She arrived wearing a designer dress and shoes that click-clacked authoritatively across Mom's tile floors. She was undeniably beautiful, tall, blonde, and poised in ways I had never been. She spoke confidently about her work, redesigning luxury homes in Aspen and Vail, dropping names of celebrities she had worked with as if it were casual conversation. During dinner, Caitlin politely complimented Mom's cooking while barely eating anything on her plate. She asked thoughtful questions about Dad's retirement and showed appropriate interest in family stories, but I noticed how her eyes scanned our house, taking inventory of every outdated fixture and worn piece of furniture with the analytical gaze of someone who redecorated spaces for a living. She was kind to Sophia and Carlos, but in that superficial way adults often are with children, asking their ages and grades while having no genuine interest in their answers. When Carlos excitedly showed her his Lego spaceship, she smiled politely and said, "How creative," before turning back to her conversation with Michael about their honeymoon plans. What struck me most was how differently my parents behaved around her. Dad, usually relaxed and casual, straightened his shoulders and spoke more formally. Mom, typically confident in her own home, seemed nervous and eager to please. They were both trying so hard to impress their son's sophisticated fiancé that they became almost unrecognizable. After Caitlin and Michael left that evening, my parents spent an hour analyzing every detail of the dinner. "She's so elegant," Mom mused, "and educated. Did you hear about the house she designed for that movie star in Aspen?" "Michael did well for himself," Dad agreed. "A woman like that could have married anyone. Shows he's really made it." I felt a familiar pang of invisibility. Here I was, living in their house, raising their grandchildren, contributing to household expenses, and helping with daily chores, but my presence was taken for granted, while Caitlin, who they had known for 3 hours, was elevated to near celebrity status simply by virtue of her wealth and glamour. The wedding was a lavish event at the Brown Palace Hotel that cost more than I made in 2 years. Caitlin's family paid for everything from the designer flowers to the live band to the open bar that flowed with top-shelf liquor. I bought a dress from Target and felt completely out of place among the designer-clad guests who spoke casually about their vacation homes and investment portfolios. Sophia and Carlos were flower girl and ring bearer, looking adorable in their formal clothes. They behaved perfectly during the ceremony, but I could see them growing restless during the lengthy cocktail hour. We may had no one to talk to, and nothing child-appropriate to eat beyond the expensive hors d'oeuvres that didn't appeal to their 6- and 8-year-old palates. After the honeymoon in Tuscany, yes, Tuscany, Michael and Caitlin settled into their married life. Michael moved into Caitlin's stunning townhouse in Cherry Creek, a 3-story showcase of contemporary design with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked like modern art. Caitlin had decorated it herself, and every detail was perfectly curated and impossibly expensive. They began joining us for Sunday dinners, and gradually everything started to change. Caitlin would arrive and immediately notice things that needed updating or fixing. "Alina, you really should consider replacing that wallpaper in the guest bathroom. I know a wonderful..."
Christmas morning 2023 was the first real glimpse of what our family would become under Caitlin's influence. She and Michael arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, Caitlin carrying perfectly wrapped gifts and coordinating silver and white paper that looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and surveyed our traditional Christmas morning chaos with barely concealed disapproval. Sophia and Carlos had been up since 6 a.m., as kids do on Christmas, and the living room showed it. Wrapping paper covered the floor, new toys were scattered across every surface, and the coffee table held the remnants of the special Christmas breakfast Mom always made: homemade cinnamon rolls, fresh fruit, and Mexican hot chocolate. "Oh my," Caitlin said as she stepped carefully through the debris, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors between patches of torn wrapping paper. "This is quite festive." She said festive the way someone might say unfortunate, and I watched my mother's face flush with embarrassment at the mess that just moments before had represented the joy of children experiencing Christmas magic. "I'm sorry about all this," Mom said, immediately beginning to gather wrapping paper. "I should have cleaned up before you arrived." "Please don't apologize," Caitlin replied smoothly, though she remained standing rather than sitting on the couch where Carlos had built an elaborate fort with his new blanket and pillows. "Children's excitement is natural, though perhaps next year we could establish some systems for managing the chaos more effectively." The gifts Caitlin brought were expensive and impractical. A cashmere scarf for 8-year-old Sophia and a set of wooden educational blocks for Carlos that looked more like decorator objects than toys. She had also brought gifts for my parents: a coffee table book about luxury interior design, and a scented candle that cost more than I typically spent on Christmas presents for everyone combined. But the most significant gift was the one she presented to them after the kids had gone outside to play with their new soccer ball. "This is something Michael and I have been discussing," she said,
pulling out a professional-looking folder. "We'd like to hire me to redesign your main living spaces. Consider it our gift to the family." Inside the folder were detailed plans for transforming my parents' home into something that looked like it belonged in Architectural Digest. The warm, comfortable furniture would be replaced with sleek, modern pieces. The family photos and personal touches would be eliminated in favor of carefully selected art pieces. The playroom adjacent to the dining room would be converted into a formal office space. "This is too generous," Mom protested, though her eyes sparkled with excitement as she flipped through the glossy renderings. "Nonsense," Caitlin waved away her concerns. "You've welcomed me into your family so warmly. This is my way of giving back. Besides, I have connections with contractors and suppliers who will give us excellent prices. The whole renovation could be completed by Easter." I studied the plans with growing alarm. Every space designed for children had been eliminated or repurposed. The basement was designed as a media room with white furniture and expensive electronics. Clearly not a space where kids would be welcome to play freely. Even the backyard plans included a sophisticated entertainment area with delicate landscaping that would never survive a soccer game or chalk drawings. "What about Sophia and Carlos?" I asked carefully. "Where would they play when they visit?" Caitlin's smile was patient but condescending. "Children are adaptable, Lisa. They'll learn to be more careful with nice things. Besides, isn't it time they started developing better habits about respecting shared spaces?" My 6- and 8-year-old children were being spoken about as if they were poorly trained pets who needed to learn not to damage the furniture. And my parents were nodding along as if this made perfect sense. "The children mostly play in their bedrooms anyway," Dad said, which wasn't true, but apparently was what he wanted to believe. "This will give us a chance to have a home we can be proud to show off." Show off to whom? I wondered. They had never been embarrassed by their home before Caitlin entered our lives. The renovation began in January. Caitlin had clearly been planning this for months because contractors appeared almost immediately, beginning with the living room and dining room. For weeks, our home was filled with dust, noise, and strangers measuring, painting, and installing expensive fixtures that transformed every familiar space. Sophia and Carlos were banished to their bedrooms during most of the work hours, and the disruption to their routine was stressful for all of us, but especially for Carlos, who needed more physical activity and space to burn off energy. By February, he was having daily meltdowns that my parents blamed on his inability to adapt to change, rather than on the fact that his environment had become chaotic and unwelcoming. "He needs more discipline," Caitlin observed, after Carlos had a tearful outburst about not being allowed to build Lego structures in the living room while workers were installing the new coffee table. "Children thrive with clear boundaries about appropriate behavior." The boundaries being established were becoming increasingly clear. My children's needs, comfort, and happiness were less important than maintaining Caitlin's vision of domestic perfection. The confrontation that followed my announcement was swift and ugly. Within minutes of telling Sophia and Carlos to pack their bags, my parents had called Michael, who arrived with Caitlin in tow, to stage what felt like an intervention. "Lisa, you're being completely irrational," Michael said, as I folded clothes into suitcases while the kids gathered their most important belongings. "Mom and Dad are offering you free housing, and you're throwing it away because of your pride." "This isn't about pride," I replied, not stopping my packing. "It's about my children's right to live somewhere they're treated with respect." Caitlin stood in the doorway, watching the chaos with the detached interest of someone observing a natural disaster. "I think everyone needs to calm down and discuss this rationally," she said. "We're all family here." "Are we?" I asked, meeting her gaze directly. because family doesn't normally charge construction crews to build housing for other family members without their consent. The argument continued for another hour, cycling through guilt trips about abandoning family, dire predictions about my financial future, and increasingly desperate attempts to convince me that moving to the basement was actually in my children's best interests. But I had crossed a threshold. For the first time in my adult life, I was prioritizing my children's well-being over my parents' approval. We left that evening with whatever we could fit in my car, staying temporarily with my colleague, Maria, while I finalized the townhouse rental. The kids were surprisingly adaptable, treating it like an adventure rather than a crisis. Sophia helped Carlos organize his favorite toys in Maria's guest room, and they both seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The townhouse lease was approved within 3 days. When we walked into our new home for the first time as residents rather than visitors, Carlos immediately ran to the sliding glass door that led to our small backyard. "Mama, can I play soccer here whenever I want?" he asked, pressing his face against the glass. "Whenever you want," I confirmed, and watched his face light up with pure joy. Sophia claimed the bedroom with the best natural light for reading, already planning where her bookshelf would go. As I watched my children explore their new home with enthusiasm rather than the careful caution they had developed at my parents' house, I knew I had made the right decision. The first few months were financially tight, but emotionally liberating. I picked up tutoring work to supplement my teaching salary, and we learned to budget carefully for groceries and utilities. But we also learned to live without constantly monitoring our noise levels or apologizing for taking up space. Carlos's asthma improved dramatically in our new environment, partly because I could control air quality, and partly because his stress levels decreased when he no longer felt like he was walking on eggshells. Sophia blossomed academically and socially, making friends at our neighborhood park and joining the school chess club. My relationship with my parents went through predictable phases. Initial anger gave way to hurt feelings, followed by attempts at reconciliation that always seemed to center around when I would come to my senses and return home. It took months for them to accept that our move was permanent and that their relationship with their grandchildren would need to be rebuilt on different terms. The breakthrough came at Christmas, nearly a year after our departure. My parents asked to visit our townhouse for the first time, bringing gifts but no expectations about how our celebration should look. They arrived to find a home filled with children's artwork, comfortable furniture marked by daily use, and the joyful chaos that comes from kids being allowed to truly live in their space. "It's very homey," Mom said, and for the first time in years, it sounded like a compliment rather than a criticism. Dad spent an hour playing with Carlos's elaborate Lego city, sprawled on the carpet without worrying about expensive furniture or pristine decor. When Sophia showed him her reading nook, complete with fairy lights and pillows, he listened with genuine interest rather than distracted politeness. "I think we made some mistakes," he admitted quietly as we cleaned up after dinner. "We got so caught up in having a beautiful house that we forgot what makes a house worth living in." It wasn't a complete apology, but it was acknowledgement. More importantly, it was a foundation we could build on. Caitlin and Michael's marriage began showing cracks within a few months of our departure. Without my household contributions and childcare assistance during their social events, the practical aspects of their lifestyle became more challenging. Caitlin had grown accustomed to a live-in support system she could direct without having to negotiate or compromise. Michael had enjoyed the validation of being this successful golden child without having to examine how his family's favoritism had hurt his sister. When they divorced 18 months later, my parents were devastated. The beautiful renovations suddenly felt hollow without the family they had been designed to impress. The basement apartment, never occupied, became a painful reminder of choices that had prioritized appearances over relationships. "We should have listened to you," Mom said during one of our monthly coffee dates, a tradition we had established to rebuild our relationship slowly. You knew your children better than we did. You knew what they needed. By the time Sophia turned 10 and Carlos turned 8, we had established a new normal that worked for everyone. My parents were loving, engaged grandparents during their visits to our home, but they respected my authority as the children's mother. They attended school plays and soccer games, celebrating their grandchildren's achievements without trying to manage or control their experiences. I had also learned valuable lessons about boundaries and self-advocacy. My teaching career had flourished once I stopped second-guessing myself constantly, and I had been promoted to a team lead position with a significant salary increase. The financial stress that had once dominated my daily life had eased considerably. Most importantly, Sophia and Carlos were thriving. They had learned that their needs and feelings mattered, that adults who loved them would listen to their concerns, and that families should feel like a safe harbor rather than a performance where they constantly had to earn their place. One evening, as we sat together doing homework at our kitchen table, the same table where they had always been welcome to spread out their projects without worrying about disrupting anyone else's plans, Sophia looked up from her math worksheet. "Mama, remember when we lived with Abuela and Abuelo and I always had to whisper in the living room?" "I remember." "I like that we don't have to whisper here." It was such a simple observation, but it captured everything important about the life we had built together. We had created a home where children could speak at normal volume, where their joy was welcomed rather than managed, where their needs were prioritized rather than minimized. The journey from that devastating divorce to this peaceful evening had taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove your children from toxic situations, even when those situations involve people you love. It had taught me that financial security means nothing if it comes at the cost of your children's emotional well-being. Most importantly, it had taught me that I was stronger and more resourceful than I had ever imagined. As I tucked the kids into their beds that night in the home we had chosen together, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the struggles we had endured, but for the strength and clarity those struggles had revealed. We had learned to value what truly mattered: love without conditions, support without strings attached, and the simple right to take up space in your own home without apologizing for existing.
Like and subscribe.